Good morning, everybody. Alrighty, so today we're gonna do a few things. One is I will give you a few minutes in breakout rooms to try to finish up the assignment that we were working at the end of the day the other day. So give me just 1 sec and I will pull that back up for you. Just a sec. I have the link. I just have to grab it. So again, if you weren't here the other day or you don't know where you put your link, we have it right here. So this is an assignment based on the types of statistics we were doing in our PowerPoint on Friday and Monday. So I'm going to go ahead and give you about 10 minutes in breakout rooms to keep working on it. If you are done, maybe you can spitball ideas with other people for the group project, which we will talk about more when you come back, because yeah, we're going to want topics for that soon so you can get going. So again, what I'm going to do is put you in breakout rooms so that you can keep working on the assignment from the other day. And so I am just going to assign you automatically. Since there aren't that many of you here right now, I'm going to go ahead and just do 3 breakout rooms. Again, these are just smaller groups so you can go work together on things. So again, let me repost the link just in case anyone who just came in didn't get it. So we are going into breakout rooms to continue to work on the assignment we started at the end of class on Monday. So I'm going to go ahead and invite you to breakout rooms. Again, the link is in the chat if you don't have your saved copy from Monday. So you'll get an invite now. Ooh. Hopefully that was helpful to have a smaller group where you could ask each other questions as you filled out that assignment. So you're probably like, okay, what do I do with this now? Real quick, I'm going to go ahead and share screen with you. So if you go to our page and then you go to assignments, you will see right here, there is a place to turn in this assignment. So you can copy paste the link to your Google document and go ahead and submit it here, just like you would for anything else. So then you will get graded on it. So if you haven't finished, try to finish that by today and re-upload it. Just to give you a little preview, let me switch my share. I'm going to show these real quick because I don't want anyone to copy. My care for this is not that you copy things. My care for this is that you start to understand how to do these. So so here, you know, is how you do a frequency distribution. As you can see, the first time I did this, I messed it up. That's okay, right? And then you have a histogram. Again, that's probably a little more challenging for y'all. And then here's what your chart would end up looking like. So I will post that after everyone has turned in and I've graded them, but that will get you going. So I also, basically what I ended up doing today in both of my morning classes is to treat this like a catch-up day, so that we can make sure we're all on the same page about everything. So finishing up the assignment from Monday, and now I want to talk about that group project. So a couple of people have been sort of confused about what you are doing for the group project. So what you're going to do is create, administer, evaluate, and describe a psychological test. Basically, the vast majority of people who have done this have done a survey. Basically, you come up with a survey about a topic you're interested in. And again, I have clearly switched these dates, so now this is due today, with 2 relevant references, just showing me you've poked around a little bit. So I thought I would also share with you, and this is all on Blackboard too, where to find some good information about this. If you go to group project, you will see sample posters. And so this will give you ideas about what previous groups have done. So for example, a couple of years ago, one group did gender roles. And so they created a questionnaire to measure femininity and masculinity. That was how they did that. Other examples from a couple of years ago, we had one about depression. Cool, this is not their final poster. Glad that I don't have their final poster posted. Oops. Here we go. This was one where they were interested in compassion. And so they created a questionnaire about compassion. And typically these questionnaires have been 10 to 20 questions that people come up with. And then this group did one about happiness. And so you can see that they talk about, so they came up with 10 items and then they compared it to existing scales. And that's what you're going to do for your reliability and validity. So I know a couple of people have already turned these into me. You can email it, or you know what, while we're talking, if it's easier for y'all, I'll just go ahead and make an assignment. If you've already emailed it to me, you don't need to resubmit it, but this can be turned in individually if you don't have a group yet. Or with a group. So let me just remind myself how many points this is. It is worth 10 points. Boom. So if you mess anything up, you can turn it in again. Okay, so again, if you've already emailed me, no worries. But if you haven't turned it in yet, this is a nice way to do it. Typically, I have you all like write it down on a piece of paper and give it to me in class, but you know, can't do that right now. So let me stop sharing for a sec and see if people have any questions about the group project in general or about the topic. So what is due ideally tonight by midnight so I can make your groups? I mean, you can even, once you found your sources, you can do it right now if you want. Is again, a topic that you want to write the questionnaire about, and then 2 sources that you've looked at already about that topic. And again, if you already know who you want to work with, you have friends already in the class, you can turn in 1 for all 3, 4, 5, however many of you there are, or 2, you know, 2 works too. If you don't have a group yet, just turn in a topic. That's a really good question, Debbie. I've had people go either way. Debbie asked, is it better to choose a broad topic or something more specific? So I've had people go really specific. So like one I can remember that I don't even think I have the poster for still, but was they did like body image in athletes. But some people have been really broad, just like depression. So it can go either way. But yeah, essentially you're saying these are the this is the topic we're gonna make items about and give this questionnaire to people. And again, if you don't know people in the class yet, just give me your topics. And then what I typically find is there are people who are interested in each other's topic. I can group them. Can it be any topic or does it have to be strictly psychology related? Good question. It should be at least somewhat psychological in nature. But there are lots of different topics that you can make psychological. So for example, let's say you wanted to ask people about political issues, right? So let's take reproductive rights, since that's a big issue in Texas right now. You could ask their opinion about reproductive rights, right? Or how they feel about reproductive rights. And then that becomes a psychological measure. And you can really do that with a lot of stuff. Let's say we wanted to make it, not as controversial. I don't know, maybe this is more controversial than I know, but you just want to, like, you're interested in the Olympics, right? So you could just ask people like their reaction to watching the Olympics. Does it make them feel patriotic? Does it make them feel hopeful? Or do they kind of feel blah about it? Yeah, Troy, go ahead.
Where are you supposed to turn in this? Everybody's different on Blackboard. I can't figure it out. My computer's slow.
Sure. Let me show you again real quick, because I literally just created it, so you wouldn't have been able to find it before that. So if you're on our Blackboard page and you go to home page and then group project, it will now be right at the top of that section and it'll say topic. Yeah, I'm trying to make it as easy as possible on y'all. Any other questions? So again, ideally by midnight, I would love to see those from you so that I can get your groups together and you can start working on it. Okay, well, again, to sort of catch up and to help you start conceptualizing the types of things you're going to be doing with this project, I have a very short lecture that I typically plan around this time, and I decided today was a good day to do it, about how do you actually write test items, or in your case, how do you write questionnaire items for a psychological survey or questionnaire. So we have, again, a brief lecture about writing test items. So in terms of item formats, there's all these different ones. Don't worry about scribbling these down right now, because all of these will each get their own slide. So when you go to create this questionnaire with your group, you can choose to just have it be dichotomous. Can be a true false. And since, again, it's psychological, right? It would be like, this is true of me, or this is false of me. And you might be like, that seems silly. Why would you only have a true false? Some of the large scale personality questionnaires we'll talk about later in the semester are true false, like 300 plus items of true false. Okay, so there is some validity to using this, right? It's simple, it's easy to administer, you can score it really quickly. On the other hand, we don't have a diverse range of responses, so that might give us low reliability. And it forces a really simple answer. If you're doing it for a test, right, it would encourage memorization. On a survey, it just might mean the person oversimplifies. So that's dichotomous. Dichotomous would be like a yes, no, or true, false, right? I would say beyond those personality questionnaires, typically in psychology, if you're using a dichotomous, it would be like a demographic questionnaire. So for example, when I do my studies, I typically ask something like, have you ever been diagnosed with an eating disorder? Yes or no, right? Because that's an important thing to know as I'm looking at things like body image disturbance. Then polytomous is each question has more than two alternatives, like a multiple choice question. It's essentially a multiple choice question, right? If you are doing this, again, like a test that there's a correct answer to, the incorrect choices would be called distractors, because they are to distract that person from the correct answer. So when you take a multiple choice test, like you did for me, that first section, any of the incorrect items are called distractors. And I think I would have mentioned in this class before, sometimes I get creative with my distractors on tests. So for example, when I test people on the Yerkes-Dodson curve, one of the names I throw in there is Hames Frazier, who was just like a friend of mine from high school, but has a hyphenated name. And so then you get a distractor that, is clearly not right, but like some people feel is right. And how many distractors are best? Typically 3 or 4. And so this is why when you take a multiple choice exam, you might do, have 4 to 5 options on each question. So this is just like fun wisdom for y'all. Should I guess on multiple choice tests? It really depends. You need to find out how the test will be scored. So some tests, I think the SAT might be one of these, you're actually penalized for incorrect answers. Not only do you get like a 0 for an incorrect answer, you might get like a -1/4 of a point. If that would be the case, then skip it, right? But if you can narrow it down to 1 or 2 possibilities, then guessing is good. If you're not penalized for incorrect answers, like on my tests, always guess. You have nothing to lose, right? I always say, if you guess, you at least have a 1 in 4 chance of getting it right? That's 25%. That's not too shabby. If you leave it blank, you have a 0% chance of getting it right? So certainly on multiple choice tests where you're not penalized for guessing, go ahead and guess. You might be right. All right, probably the most common thing you'll see in psychological questionnaires, surveys, the type of thing you all are going to make is a Likert scale. And this says 5 or 6 alternative answers are given. I've seen Likert scales anywhere from 3 alternatives up to 10 alternatives. So there really is a range, but typically we do see somewhere between 5 and 7, I would say. And so these are where you take a questionnaire and it'll say something like strongly disagree, somewhat disagree, neutral, or like often mine say something like neither disagree nor agree, right? Somewhat agree and strongly agree. So this is really good for the measure of attitudes, emotions, feelings, because it gives information on the degree of your attitude, the degree of agreement, or the degree you think that applies to you. So this gives you more nuance than that dichotomy that we talked about earlier, that true false, because now the person can say, well, okay, it's essentially here, right? You're saying it's true of me, but you say whether it's like super true of me or like somewhat true of me. So then you get more nuance as well. So again, Likert scales, I would say most of the groups who've made the questionnaires in the past have used a Likert scale, just because again, it's fairly typical to use one. When you're doing Likert scales, I would say probably your biggest question when you're deciding on the number of points on your Likert scale you'll have is whether you want a true neutral or not. So some questionnaire writers like to, let's say, only have 4 or 6 items so the people can't choose a neutral. But other questionnaire writers like to have that neutral in there. So then you would have an odd number, so you could have a middle value. Again, there are advantages or disadvantages to both. So it's something that as you work with your group, you'll have to think about. Again, let's say we're measuring depression. Do we want to have a medium in there where it's sort of like, nah, I'm just sort of feeling okay, right? Or do we want to force that person to say they're feeling at least a little depressed or a little happy, right? Then there's what's called the category format. This will be more choices, 10 or 20 point scales. This can be controversial because test takers can change the ratings based on the context. So if I compared, let's say we were doing this as like a rating form for your group presentations, right? Let's say everyone in this class just does a stellar job, which I'm anticipating, right, for your posters this year, right? So then like the groups that didn't do quite as well might be seen as like performing poorly, as opposed to if everyone bombed it, right? The one group that did a little better would look like they were super awesome. So you want to avoid that by defining the endpoints clearly. Essentially, you want to make it so whenever you're filling this out, each person in front of you, or if you're rating something about yourself, each item in front of you is judged on its own, not compared to other people or other items. Checklists, you see this in some personality assessments, and this is really a true false, honestly. It is you would list the items and then they check it if it's true, they leave it blank if it's false. So even though this sort of is presented as its own type of thing, it's a dichotomy. It's just a different way of getting people to answer a dichotomy. All right, a Q sort is a little more complicated. So it's like adjective checklists, but they offer more than 2 choices, not more that 2 choices. So for example, you might give people descriptors and have them sort them into piles, maybe 9 different piles. And then you can find discriminations about each statement. And the items are placed that are in the extreme category. So like the 1 or the 9 give the most information about that person. Q sorts are great for very complex issues. Obviously, in COVID times, doing a Q sort would be pretty challenging. You'd have to like laminate it and sanitize it after each one. Not saying you can't do this, but I probably wouldn't recommend doing this year. Item analysis is something that's also important. And this is something that we will talk about as we get to like our SPSS days and the days that you are looking at how well your questionnaire did. But, you know, let's say this is a test, right? Like an actual test where I was like the exam y'all took last week, right? So item difficulty is something you want to look at. So, you know, did everybody bomb that item? Or did, again, like in this example, 5 out of 6 people got item 11 correct. So, you know, not that difficult. Again, it kind of allows you to account for guessing. And so you want it between 50-50, right? If everyone was just guessing, it'd be about 50%, or, you know, if there's 4 choices, 25%. And then if everyone got it right, then it'd be too easy, right? And that would be 100%. Or maybe, you know, like when I write my test, I always want a couple of these on there so that everybody will get it right for sure. Again, not necessarily for your questionnaire, but just sort of thinking about testing in general. Should the difficulty be the same for all the items? No, you want a variety. And in fact, when we start talking about intelligence testing, what we will see is the items actually start easy and get harder as you go through. So here you can see sort of the range of difficulties level that they recommend. Item discriminability tells us something about the people who answered an item correctly, or in the case of your questionnaire, the people who like endorsed an item, let's say. So like, did the people who succeeded on a particular item do well as the test as a whole? Or again, in a questionnaire, did someone who selected that particular item also have a high score on your personality trait or opinion that you're asking about? So basically what this is asking is, did how they answered that item, that one question, tell us something about the whole assessment? So there's a couple different ways you can test this. One is the extreme group method. So once you get the results, you can divide them into the top and bottom thirds and kind of ignore the people in the middle. So again, let's take a questionnaire about depression here. So the people who scored highest on depression and the people who scored lowest on depression, y'all are supposed to get about 30 people, right? So that would be your top 10 scorers on depression and your bottom 10 scorers on depression. And the difference between these two is called the Discrimination Index. There's also something called the point by serial method. This is a correlation between performance on the item and performance on the whole test. Or what you'll see as we look at questionnaires is it's a correlation between the score on that particular item, question, statement, and the whole test. So item discriminability basically allows you to start, let's say you created a test that has 100 items, right? And it's just not going to be realistic to ask someone 100 items about depression every time they come in, right? So you would use something like this to say, ooh, so these 5 items or these 25 items, right, are not correlating really highly with the scores on the test overall. So we can chuck those, basically. And the nice thing is SPSS will do this type of stuff for us. So when we get to the SPSS stage, I'll walk you through how to do all of this, and you won't have to do any of this by hand. So in terms of pictures of item characteristics, we could do curves to look at it. Essentially, this just allows us to visualize the item. I don't expect you all to do this for your particular questionnaire. This is just sort of informative. And then this is more what someone would do, again, for one of the more formalized types of assessment we're going to talk about in this class. So you might want to analyze criterion referenced items. So in this case, you would specify the criterion, the learning objectives. What do you want people to be able to know, do, say, right, after doing this? Teachers who do research do this. Or let's say they have 2 of the same class, right? 2 sophomore level math classes, let's say. But they have this idea about this new way of teaching. So what they would do is they would say, okay, so my first period class is going to do this new unit that I think will help them. And my 4th period class, same class, is not. And then basically you would teach the new unit to that first period class, your experimental group. You teach something unrelated or teach as usual for your control group. And then you would create a criterion reference test for both groups. And you can graph the difference and kind of see, did it help or not? Hopefully it did. If it didn't, then back to the drawing board. Item response theory is, again, not something you all are going to be expected to know, but just sort of fun to know about. Item response theory is where you program a test into a computer program so that it will customize the items that each user sees. So each test taker would get a different subset of items based on how they answer initial items. So like there's a item response theory based version of the MMPI. Let's say the MMPI has measures of things like low positive emotionality. So let's say you endorse the first, you said true for the first low positive emotionality item. Well, the item response theory built into this computer program would then give you more questions about low positive emotionality. If you said no to maybe the first 1 or 2 items, it wouldn't bother to ask you the rest of the questions on that category. So you might get a shorter version of it. And it would do that for each area of interest on the scale. You can also do this, and I think I've mentioned this previously, with how well people are doing on the scored test. So like the GRE does this, where it gives you easy items first, and as you do better, it gives you harder items. And as you bomb them, it gives you easier items. So like in the moment, you know how well you're doing or not, which can be a little disconcerting, to be perfectly honest. So the score is defined by the difficulty, level of difficulty of items, or again, if we're thinking about this in a personality test type of way, like the number of items you're asked to answer from a particular part of the exam. Alrighty. Questions about writing items, about choosing your topic for the group, any of the stuff that we have coming up right here. Alrighty, well, what I'm gonna do is give you the rest of the class to maybe ask other people if they might be interested in a topic. You can use the chat to select who you chat to, or just come up with your topic if you haven't already. And I will be available. I'm going to stop the recording, but you can either unmute yourself or chat me privately in the chat. But you have about 7 minutes to keep working on this with me here to answer questions. So I'm going to go ahead and give you that time. If you've already got your topic, if you've already got everything filled out, great, you can go. If you've got a topic idea, but you haven't turned it in yet, now's a great time to start looking for some sources and let me know if you need help with that.